In the fall of 1978, NBC launched a sitcom about a wealthy Manhattan businessman who took in two young black boys from Harlem after the death of their mother, who had worked for him as a housekeeper. The premise was considered risky. A racially mixed family on primetime television was something the networks had tried before and failed at. What nobody expected was that the show would run for 8 seasons, make one of its child stars the most recognizable face on American television, and then watch 3 of those same stars live out some of the most publicly tragic lives in the history of the medium. The Curse of Diff'rent Strokes is not a tabloid invention. It is a documented, heartbreaking record of what can happen when a system that profits from children fails to protect them. This is the cast of Diff'rent Strokes, then and now. What you talking about, Willis? 5 words, delivered with a combination of exasperation and comic authority that Gary Coleman made entirely his own. Arnold Jackson was 10 years old when the show began, the younger of the 2 brothers, the one whose wit and confidence carried scene after scene across 8 seasons and 181 episodes. Coleman was 10 years old during filming too, because unlike almost every other child actor in television history, the age he played on screen was exactly the age he was in real life. That synchronicity was a medical accident. Gary Coleman was born on February 8, 1968 in Zion, Illinois. He was adopted as an infant by Willie and Sue Coleman. From birth, he suffered from focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, a rare congenital kidney disease that attacked his kidneys and required extraordinary intervention from the beginning of his life. He had his first kidney transplant at 5 years old, his second at 16. Between surgeries, he required daily dialysis. The medications necessary to prevent rejection of the transplanted kidneys caused severe side effects, including the permanent stunting of his growth. As an adult, Gary Coleman stood 4 feet 8 inches tall. The disease that made his television career possible also made every day of his life a medical challenge. At the height of Diff'rent Strokes, Coleman was earning $70,000 per episode. His total earnings from the show are estimated at $18 million. His parents had written themselves into his contract as paid managers. When the show ended in 1986 and Coleman turned to his trust fund, he found $220,000. The rest was gone. In 1989, he sued his parents and his business manager for misappropriation. He won. He received $1.3 million, a fraction of what had been taken. In 1999, he filed for bankruptcy. He was 31 years old. The years that followed were marked by the specific cruelty that Hollywood reserves for child stars who age out of their usefulness. Coleman was typecast into his own image, unable to escape Arnold Jackson, unable to find the roles that would have let him prove he was more than a catchphrase. He worked as a security guard. He ran briefly for governor of California in 2003, receiving 14,000 votes. VH1 named him the greatest child star of all time in 2005. He married Shannon Price in 2007 in a ceremony kept entirely private. The marriage was turbulent and marked by domestic incidents on both sides. On May 26, 2010, Gary Coleman fell at his home in Utah and suffered an intracranial hemorrhage. He was taken to Utah Valley Regional Medical Center. He briefly regained consciousness, then deteriorated rapidly. On May 28, 2010, Shannon Price made the decision to remove him from life support. Gary Coleman was 42 years old. Arnold Jackson always had an answer for everything. Gary Coleman spent his adult life searching for questions that had no answer about his health, his money, his parents, his place in a world that had loved him completely and then moved on. Kimberly Drummond was the Drummond family's daughter, the older sister figure to Arnold and Willis, the one who grounded the show's broader comedy in something that felt like genuine family warmth. Dana Plato was 13 years old when the show began, discovered by a producer who spotted her during a brief appearance on The Gong Show. She was blonde, effortlessly charming, and possessed of a comedic timing that made Kimberly one of the show's most beloved characters. She was fired in 1984. The reason was her pregnancy. The network decided that a pregnant Kimberly Drummond was incompatible with the show's wholesome image. She was allowed to return for guest appearances after her son Tyler was born, but her starring role was gone. She was 19 years old. What happened after that is one of the most harrowing stories in the history of American child stardom. Plato struggled to find work that separated her from Kimberly Drummond. The industry that had made her famous had no use for her as an adult. She posed for Playboy in 1989. She appeared in low-budget films that she later described with genuine shame. Her finances collapsed. An accountant with power of attorney had, she claimed, disappeared with most of her money. By the early 1990s, she was working behind a dry cleaning counter in Las Vegas. On a day in February 1991, Dana Plato put on a hat and sunglasses, walked into a video store near her apartment, and robbed it with a pellet gun. She got $164. She was arrested 15 minutes later. The clerk who called 911 told the dispatcher, "I've just been robbed by the girl who played Kimberly on Diff'rent Strokes." She was sentenced to 5 years probation. The following year, she was arrested again, this time for forging a prescription for Valium. On May 7, 1999, Dana Plato appeared on The Howard Stern Show. She insisted she had been sober for 10 years. She sounded calm and hopeful. Listeners called in with messages ranging from sympathetic to cruel. The following day, May 8th, she was found dead in a motorhome parked outside her fiance's mother's house in Moore, Oklahoma. She had taken a lethal combination of hydrocodone and the muscle relaxant carisoprodol. She was 34 years old. A coroner's inquest ruled her death a suicide. The story did not end there. Dana Plato's son, Tyler Lambert, was 14 years old at the time of her death. He struggled with drugs and depression in the years that followed. On May 6, 2010, 2 days before the 11th anniversary of his mother's death, Tyler Lambert died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound in Oklahoma. He was 25 years old. Kimberly Drummond had everything: a loving father, a beautiful home, a family that held together. Dana Plato had almost none of those things in the years after the camera stopped. And the cruelest part is that the camera had once made it look like she did. Willis Jackson was the older brother, the cool one, the one who kept his guard up, who had seen more of the world than Arnold, and carried that knowledge with a protective wariness that made him the show's most quietly complex character. Todd Bridges was 13 years old when the show began. He had been acting since the age of 6, the first black child actor to have a recurring role on a successful American television series, appearing in Little House on the Prairie, The Waltons, and the landmark miniseries. Roots before Diff'rent Strokes made him a household name. What the audience didn't know was what was happening off camera. In his memoir, Killing Willis, published in 2010, Bridges disclosed that at the age of 11, he was sexually abused by a publicist named Ronald Rayton, who had used gifts, attention, and manipulation to buy his silence. The abuse shaped the years that followed in ways that Bridges has described with unflinching honesty. When the show ended in 1986, Bridges was 21 years old and ill-equipped for what came next. He became addicted to crack cocaine. He was dealing. He was arrested for the attempted murder of a drug dealer in 1989 and acquitted, defended by Johnnie Cochran. He stabbed a landlord in a dispute over unpaid rent. He was, by his own account, on a path that should have ended his life. He got sober. He fought his way back. He wrote the memoir. He has been working steadily as an actor, director, and producer for over 2 decades. He appeared in the 2024 television film Christmas in the Friendly Skies. He has 2 children and lives in Los Angeles. As of 2026, Todd Bridges is 60 years old and the only surviving member of the original Diff'rent Strokes cast. Every one of his co-stars from that first season is gone. He is the last one standing. And the fact that he is standing at all is not luck. It is a decision he made and keeps making every single day. Willis Jackson always looked out for Arnold. Todd Bridges spent decades learning to look out for himself. Philip Drummond was the man at the center of everything, the widowed Manhattan businessman who had promised his dying housekeeper that he would take care of her sons. CONRAD BAIN played him for every one of the show's 181 episodes, the only cast member in the entire run to appear in every single one. He was 55 years old when the show began, a veteran of 6 years on Maude, before Norman Lear brought him to Diff'rent Strokes. BAIN was a classically trained actor from Lethbridge, Alberta, Canada, who had built a career on Broadway and in television across 3 decades before Philip Drummond made him a household name. On set, he he functioned as something very close to what his character was, a genuine authority figure who took his responsibilities to the younger cast members seriously. Todd Bridges has spoken in interviews about BAIN's stabilizing presence, the real paternal warmth he extended to Coleman and Bridges and Plato during the years they spent on set together. After Diff'rent Strokes, BAIN continued to work in television and appeared in the Broadway production On Borrowed Time in 1991 and 92. He largely withdrew from public life in his later years. On January 14, 2013, CONRAD BAIN died at his home in Livermore, California. He was 89 years old. Philip Drummond made a promise and kept it for 8 seasons. CONRAD BAIN made a similar kind of promise to the children around him on that set, and by all accounts, he kept that one too. Willis Jackson always looked out for Arnold. Todd Bridges spent decades learning to look out for himself. Mrs. Edna Garrett appeared in only 37 episodes of Diff'rent Strokes, the first season and the first half of the second, before she was spun off into her own show. And yet, she is inseparable from the identity of the series, because her warmth and her specific kind of no-nonsense competence established the emotional temperature of the Drummond household before anyone else could. Charlotte Rae was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 1926. She was a veteran of Broadway and early television before Diff'rent Strokes, having performed across multiple decades with a comic precision that made her one of the most respected character actresses of her generation. Norman Lear wanted her specifically for Mrs. Garrett. She was originally contracted elsewhere, and Lear used his considerable influence to secure her release. The Facts of Life ran for 9 seasons. Charlotte Rae played Mrs. Garrett as house mother at the fictional Eastland School from 1979 to 1988, winning Emmy nominations and cementing a television legacy that stands entirely on its own terms. In 2017, she publicly disclosed that she had been diagnosed with bone cancer and pancreatic cancer. She continued to work and make public appearances until she was physically unable. On August 5, 2018, Charlotte Rae died at her home in Los Angeles. She was 92 years old. With her death, Todd Bridges became the last living member of the original cast. Mrs. Garrett kept the Drummond household running. Charlotte Rae kept working until the very end, which is perhaps the most fitting tribute to both of them. Sam McKinney arrived in season 6 as the cute young replacement energy that television shows always reach for when their original child stars start looking too old for the roles they play. He was 9 years old when he joined the cast, bright-eyed and gap-toothed, and he appeared in 48 episodes across the show's final 3 seasons as Drummond's newly adopted son. Johnnie Cochran was born in Moore, Oklahoma, the same town where Dana Plato would die years later, on November 2, 1975. Before Diff'rent Strokes, he had appeared in commercials and minor television roles. After it, his career took a turn that surprised people who had only ever seen Sam McKinney. He appeared in Terminator 2, Judgment Day in 1991 in the arcade scene alongside Edward Furlong and Arnold Schwarzenegger. He played Budnick on the Nickelodeon series Salute Your Shorts. He became an in-demand voice actor, lending his voice to animated series and video games across 2 decades. In 2026, Johnnie Cochran is 50 years old. He has maintained a working career in voice acting and occasional on-screen appearances, has stayed entirely out of the tabloids, and represents the quietly successful exit from child stardom that none of the show's original stars managed to find. Sam McKinney was the new kid who came in at the end and tried to hold things together. Johnnie Cochran was the one who walked away from the whole thing intact. Diff'rent Strokes ran from November 3, 1978 to March 7, 1986. 8 seasons, 181 episodes, a catchphrase that entered the permanent vocabulary of American culture, and a cast whose stories after the final episode constitute one of the most sobering documents of what the entertainment industry does to children when it is finished with them. Gary Coleman died at 42, his fortune stolen, his body failing, his marriage a public battlefield. Dana Plato died at 34 in a motorhome in Oklahoma, the day after telling a radio audience she was finally okay. Her son died 15 years later, 2 days before the anniversary of her death. CONRAD BAIN made it to 89, having played the father figure on screen, and, by most accounts, off-screen too. Charlotte Rae made it to 92, having built a second career as significant as her first. And Todd Bridges is still here, 60 years old, sober, working, with 2 children and a memoir, and the quiet authority of someone who looked directly into the worst version of his own life and decided to walk away from it. The show asked a simple question every week: what does it mean mean to be a family when everything about you is different? The cast answered that question with their work. What happened to them afterward is a different kind of answer, and a harder one to sit with. That was the cast of Diff'rent Strokes, then and now.